like watching people sing who enjoy singing, don't you? I enjoy singing. Nobody else enjoys it when I sing, but I like listening to these folks. What a great blessing tonight. I want you to take the Word of God with me and open it in the Old Testament to 1 Samuel chapter number 16. And we'll read a few verses together here in just a moment. I bring your attention tonight to the life of David and to a principle that I think is one of the truly beautiful things in the life of David. It applies to every one of us, no matter where you are in life, what stage in life, what you're dealing with tonight. Pastor calls this meeting the most encouraging service of the week, and I'm praying that the Spirit of God will use this truth to encourage us. Now, the next chapter, not 1 Samuel 16, but the next chapter is probably the most famous Bible story known by most people. 1 Samuel 17, of course, is the story of David and Goliath. I was walking through an airport bookstore the other day and looked up on the shelf, and big bold letters was the title of a new book by Malcolm Gladwell entitled David and Goliath. And it's not really at all about the Bible story. It's a secular book, New York Times bestseller, but that's the title he chose because even that title garners attention. And people know, oh yes, we know the story of David and Goliath, and of course they make applications to lots of things. But I want to show you tonight that it would have been impossible to have had 1 Samuel 17 without 1 Samuel 16. That a God who is a God of perfect order made it so in 1 Samuel 16 that he not only got David ready, he got the circumstances ready so that he could fulfill all the good pleasure of his will in 1 Samuel 17. Now read with me please in 1 Samuel chapter 16 beginning in verse number 11. The preachers come to the house. Everybody straightens up when the preacher shows up on the door. And Samuel has showed up to anoint the next king of Israel. You know the story. They go through all the boys. No, that's not the one. That's not the one. That's not the one. Finally, in desperation, in verse 11, Samuel said unto Jesse, Are here all thy children? And he said, There remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. By the way, the young ones always get the worst chores, don't they? He keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said unto Jesse, Send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and with all of a beautiful countenance, goodly to look to. And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold now, an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants which are before thee to seek out a man who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass, when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite that is cunning in playing, and a mighty valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. I'd like you to take your pen tonight and mark in verse 19 the name David, and then these three little words, with the sheep. Now when I say David, immediately in your mind you think David with Goliath. But I show you tonight David with the sheep. You see, there is always a previous chapter. There is always the chapter before. If I could, in a sentence, tell you what it is I hope you take from this message, it would be this. I hope tonight that you can see, not only in David's life, but in your life, that God is always doing a preparing work. And I have to be honest with you, I don't always like God's preparing work. I like His prospering work. Amen. I like His providing work. I like His protecting work. I like His promoting work. I like all of those works, but sometimes God just sits down on you and says, I'm going to spend a little time here working on you to prepare you for the next season. And that's painful at times. And I would say to you that when all of this is transpiring in 1 Samuel 16, David didn't have a clue. He had no idea in the next chapter he's standing in the middle of the valley of Elah facing the giant from Gath. He had no aspiration or idea sitting in the middle of the field watching a bunch of dirty sheep that he was the next king of Israel. None of that was in his mind, but it was in God's mind. And God is always preparing. By the way, when God prepares, He does a thorough work. He works on this end and He always works on the other end. God was getting David ready for the throne, and God was getting the throne ready for David. You see, we have the advantage of hindsight. We can see in history what God did. But at the moment David was living in, he didn't understand all that was taking place. And I'm talking to some people tonight who are going through something in your Bethlehem, going through something in your family, going through something in your circumstances, and wondering, what on earth is God doing? And I came tonight to tell you, I don't know what it is, but God is preparing you for something. Pastors talked for years about God's conscious and God's unconscious preparation. That there are things we understand God says to do, and then there's some things God is doing. Look, here's the problem. I like to control the preparation. Any of you people out there crazy about control and you like to be in charge? Yeah, we get to dictate to God how it's going to turn out. We get to draw the boundaries like we think they ought to be, and God says, I don't work that way. Now, I know better than you know, and I know where you're going. You don't have a clue where you're going. I'm preparing you for that. Hold your place here a second. Turn over to the Proverbs just for a moment. And let me show you something that Solomon wrote. Interestingly enough, David's son. You have to wonder if maybe his daddy taught him this after some reflection on life. Look at Proverbs chapter 16, verse number 1. The Bible says in Proverbs 16, verse 1, the preparations of the heart in man and the answer of the tongue is, mark these words, from the Lord. Now, I've marked in my Bible, preparations from the Lord. Now, if you turn over a few pages to chapter 24 and verse number 27, the same writer gives a command that there is a preparation work that we do. Look at Proverbs 24, verse 27. Prepare thy work without end, make it fit for thyself in the field, and afterwards build thine house. He says there is a preparing work that God does, and there is a preparing work that you do. And our problem is we want to be in charge of all of it. We want to run both construction crews. God says, no, I've given you a work to prepare. You just take care of that. Let me take care of the rest of the details. Can I tell you that perhaps the greatest juncture of faith in David's life was not standing in the valley of Elah? It was sitting in the middle of the field watching a bunch of sheep after he's been anointed the next king and wondering how God was going to make it happen. You see, God is always at work. And by the way, this is not just for young people. We talk to college students and teenagers and children. We say, now look, God's preparing you for something. God's getting you ready for something. That's true. God puts that kind of foundation in. But I'm learning something the older I get, and that is God's preparing work never stops. Can I tell you why that is? Watch, please. Because God always has something more for His children. At every season in life, look, at every stage in your Christian growth, God Himself is getting you ready for the next thing that He has for you. For some of you, He's preparing your children for something. He may be preparing you for something for your children. He's preparing this church for something. I have sensed in my heart for many, many months that God was preparing our church and doing something rich and wonderful in the hearts of the membership of this church. I don't know what it is, but boy, I'm excited about it because when God does something, it's always good. God's getting you ready for something. By the way, God's getting His people ready for the rapture, if nothing else. I don't know what's going on in the world now. I can't explain to you everything you saw on the news today or heard over the network this week. But I know one thing. God is still on His throne in heaven. He's got it all under control, and He is preparing us for something in this world. God prepares for revival. You see, for a follower of Christ, there's always more. For a true follower of the Lord Jesus, there's always a future. And by the way, with God, it's always good. But the problem is, God has to get us ready for that. By the way, somebody says, well, when's this going to end? When we see Him face to face. Eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, neither hath entered into the heart of man the things that God hath prepared for them that love Him. God's a God of preparation. Watch, please. And God's going to prepare you for the next stage, and 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 prepare you for the final stage until someday you see Him exactly like He is. And it'll all be perfect for all eternity. And we're not there yet, but wait a minute. God's getting us ready to be there. And for David, he did it with the sheep. I'm not going to give you points tonight. I'm going to give you 3 pictures. When I'm done, I wish I could draw them. I'm not an artiste, but if I was, I'd like to draw these pictures for you. But if you'll let me just draw a mental picture, 3 objects that I want you to see in David's hand, because every one of these things that God put in David's hand in 1 Samuel 16 was to get him ready for what He had for him to do with them in 1 Samuel 17. Look, everything that God put in David's hand was an emblem of something God was putting in David's heart. Step back from your life for a moment. Step back from your troubles. Step back from your circumstances and trials and think for just a minute that maybe, just maybe, God is getting you ready for something. What's in David's hand? God is preparing him with. Write down the first one, would you please? The first thing you see in his hand is a shepherd's staff. It's really a fascinating thing, but if you turn over one page to 1 Samuel 17 and you come down to verse number 40, when David is on his way out to fight Goliath, he's charging out into the valley. I always had it in my mind, he's got that little leather pouch on his side, and he's got those 5 smooth stones he got out of the brook, and he's got his sling in one hand, but did you ever notice the first thing that God said is in his hand? Look at 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 40. The Bible says, and he took his staff in his hand. Before the 5 smooth stones, before the shepherd's bag, before the scrip, before the sling that was in his other hand, the Bible says that he had a shepherd's staff in his hand. Now, I've got in my mind at this moment a 17-year-old kid holding on to the same stick he's leaned on for years. And he's standing out in the middle of a valley that is totally unfamiliar to him, and he's facing the biggest trial of his life. But in his hand is a shepherd's staff that has not failed him. You know when David learned to use that shepherd's staff? On all those really boring days sitting on a rock under scorching sun in the east, watching a bunch of dirty animals that belonged to his daddy. And I want to submit to you tonight that it was not at all about the staff that was in his hand. When God put a shepherd's staff in David's hand, what He really was doing was putting a shepherd's heart in David's heart. All those weeks, all those months of David watching sheep. Sheep? What's the deal here? I'm going to be the king. Look, God was getting him ready to shepherd the most beautiful, precious flock God ever gave to a man. God was getting him ready to shepherd His own chosen people, the nation of Israel. Look, hold your place here. Go to the Psalms just a moment. Go to Psalm 78. Look at this testimony that David gives. Here's how it happened. Psalm 78, verse 70, gives us a little snapshot of exactly what I'm talking about. The Bible says in Psalm 78, verse 70, He chose David. I love those words. He chose David, also His servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. That sounds a lot like David with the sheep, doesn't it? From following the ewes, great with young, He brought him to feed Jacob His people and Israel His inheritance. So He fed them according to the integrity of His heart and guided them by the skillfulness of His hands. Look, I love the picture God gives here. God says, David, I'm going to let you feed a whole nation. But before I do, I'm going to put you out in the field and let you feed a bunch of sheep. And I'm going to prepare you. David, I'm going to put you on the throne, let you be my man, and let you guide a whole nation. But before I do, I'm going to put you out in the field with nothing but a shepherd's staff in your hand and let you guide some stubborn sheep. so that I can prepare you. Can I tell you that when I look in my mind's eye at that shepherd staff speaks to me about lots of ordinary days. Did you know life is made up of ordinary days? Now, we all like the extraordinary days. I remember the day I got saved. That was an extraordinary day. I remember the day that I got married. Friday the 13th we got married on. That was the greatest Friday the 13th of my life. That was an extraordinary Friday the 13th. I remember when our first child was born, and our second and our third. Those were extraordinary days. But the truth is, when you think about life, life is not made up of extraordinary days. Life is made up mostly of lots of ordinary days. It's a fascinating thing about days. Men are remembered for their extraordinary days, but they're made on their ordinary ones. Let me illustrate. Walk through the Christian Heritage Center with me and see the picture of William Carey, father of modern missions. And somebody says, wow, what a man, what a missionary, what a leader. You know what William Carey said about himself? He said, when I am dead and gone, I hope that someone will remember me simply as a plodder. A plodder? No, a pioneer. No, a plodder from his perspective. How about Christopher Columbus? Somebody said, oh, the great explorer. Oh, yes, all the extraordinary days and the things that he discovered. Then you read the journals of Columbus, and day after day after day, most of the journal entries simply said three words: we sailed on. We sailed on. We sailed on. See, when I say David, immediately you say David and Goliath. But wait a minute, what about David and the sheep? Because I tell you, there would have been no David and Goliath without David and the sheep. There would have been no extraordinary day to be remembered about David's life if there had not been a lot of ordinary days where David just did exactly what God had given him to do and pressed forward. By the way, some days that's all we're supposed to do is sail on, plod on, press on. You think every day is going to be a Valley of Elah experience? Not going to happen. You think every day is going to turn out extraordinary, beyond, and it's not going to happen. Look, life is made up of lots of ordinary days, but it's on ordinary days where God is building a man, where God is making a man, where God is strengthening a man's faith and preparing him for everything He has for him to do. Do you ever think about all the unrecorded days of the Apostle Paul? When I think about the Apostle Paul, I see him getting up out of a pile of stones. They just stoned him to death. He came back from the dead. Walks back in the city, takes off preaching again. I say, I like that. Man, what a day. I see him standing in Athens preaching about the unknown God that ye ignorantly worship. I see him sitting in a prison cell somewhere writing these great prison letters, and somebody says, wow, what extraordinary days. Well, let me ask you a question. What about all the days that nothing is written about him? What about all the days where Paul did nothing but walk from one town to the next? Just ordinary days. Can I submit to you tonight? David had a lot of those. A lot of ordinary days with nothing in his hand but a shepherd's staff. But wait a minute, he had something more than that. He had a God in heaven who had his eye on him. He was preparing him. Look at me, please. Some of you are bored. You're bored with your marriage. You're bored with your job. You're bored with your life. You're bored with the ordinary. But could I suggest to you that maybe God is about to do an extraordinary thing with your ordinary life so that you won't get the glory for it? He will. Amen. He had a staff in his hand. There's a second thing David had in his hand. Go back to our passage in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Look at verse 40. In the other hand, the Bible says he had a sling in his hand. Now, this is not just any sling. This is a famous sling. I remember years ago, Grant was very little, and he got his first slingshot. And I came home one day from work, and he was using it. He was really using it. And I had said, no, we don't shoot the neighbor's cats. This is not a nice thing. Slingshots are a lot of fun, you know. For David, this slingshot was not a toy. This slingshot was a weapon. It was a means of defense. Oh, I'm sure as a kid sitting out in the field, bored out of his mind, He did a lot of target practice and maybe did a little hunting. I don't know what he did with it, but I know this. When a lion came along and a bear came along, he knew how to use it. When I see that sling in his hands, you know what I think about? I think about all the battles of life. Can I tell you, God not only uses ordinary days, God uses difficult ones. You think it was fun when he had to fight a bear? You think in the midst of the battle with a lion, he's thinking, man, this is what I was made for. No. No, he's in the middle of the battle. He's fighting for, not just for his sheep, he's fighting for his own life. Some of you are in the fight for your life right now. In the fight for your marriage, in the fight for a child or a wayward family member or loved one. You're brokenhearted tonight. You say, all I got is this little sling. I don't know what to do with it. Look, it's not about the sling. It's about God teaching David what he can do with every little thing yielded to God. Can you imagine that little sling in David's hand in the valley of Elah with one rock in it above his head? Watch David release one side of that sling and the stone comes out straight on the mark, straight in the forehead of Goliath. He falls down, face forward, not backward, face forward. I think God slapped him dead is what happened. Watch that sling in his hand. Somebody said, wow, I'd like to do that. Good. Go sit out in the wilderness for about 6 months with it. Because God will put you through some difficult seasons to teach you that it's not in your hand at all. It's in God's hand and you can trust him. Let's let David speak again for himself. Go back to the Psalms. I'm back and forth here a lot because we're letting David speak for himself. Go to Psalm 118 for just a moment. I'm going to read a verse to you and you're going to say, well, what on earth does that verse have to do with difficult days? Just hold on for a moment. Look at Psalm 118, verse number 24. We quote this when we're having good days, you know. This is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. I like the Lord's day. Do you love the Lord's day? Did you know someday soon every day will be the Lord's day? Amen. That's going to be something, isn't it? But when we're having a really good day, we like to quote this verse. This is the day the Lord hath made. Let me ask you a question. What when you're sitting in a hospital, can you still say, this is the day the Lord hath made? What when you go to a graveside, we will rejoice and be glad in it. Did you know that Psalm 118 is part of the Jewish Hallel? By tradition, it was sung at the end of every Passover meal that the Jews celebrated. On the night that Jesus celebrated the Passover supper with his disciples for the last time, what we now call the memorial supper, the Bible says when they finished the end of it, they sang an hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. Most Bible teachers believe that the hymn they would have sung by tradition would have been the words of Psalm 118. So I want you to sit in that room for just a moment, and I want you to watch the Son of God who knows what he's about to do. And I want you to hear him sing, this is the day that the Lord hath made. On his way to Gethsemane, on his way to Gabbatha, on his way to Golgotha, on his way to a grave, he said, this is the day the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. I tell you, God will put you through some difficult days, just like he'll put you through some ordinary days so that you will learn it's not about you, it's all about him. It's not about a staff or a sling or anything else in your life. It is about God preparing you for what he has planned for you. There's a third thing in David's hand. You know what it is. There's a staff, there's a sling, and there's a harp. I wish I could have heard David play the harp. You reckon the Lord will let David play the harp in heaven? Boy, I'd like to hear it, wouldn't you? He is known as the sweet psalmist of Israel. He wrote more psalms than anybody else. I mean, this man had a gift from God. The Lord was with him, no doubt about it. And he not only wrote them and composed them, then he sang them and played them beautifully. As a matter of fact, when Saul was going through his terrible bout with evil spirits, they said, we need somebody to come in and play beautiful music and soothe the savage beast. Let's find somebody that can play. And immediately they said, find David. He's cunning on a harp. He's good at it. And you see David, a teenage boy, kind of overtaken with the wonder of it all, sitting in the midst of the king's palace in the throne room. He's never been there before. Playing his harp and the king smiling and nodding at him. Somebody said, boy, I'd like to have that day. You ever wonder where he learned to play the harp like that? I'll tell you where he learned to play it. He learned to play it all alone. Sitting out in the wilderness, in the middle of the night, daddy not there, brother's not there, all alone, watching a flock of sheep with no one to sing to but God. If I could pick a place to watch David play his harp and sing, I wouldn't pick Saul's throne room. I'd like to go out in that Judean wilderness and hide over there behind a rock somewhere and watch a teenage boy who was in love with his God just sing and play to his Creator. You read the Psalms. Read the Psalms. That's not normal. You know where it came from? It came from the pen of a man who had learned to commune with God on lonely days. Amen. See, God will give you ordinary days, and God will give you difficult days, but every now and then God will give you a lonely day. And you may not even be alone when it happens, but God will give you a lonely day where you feel very much all alone. In the midst of that, God will teach you how to sing, how to enjoy Him. It wasn't about the harp. That wasn't it. It had nothing to do with a harp. It was about God teaching David the wonder of worship. It was about God teaching David to live consciously in the presence of God if everybody was around or if nobody was around. By the way, you know how I know that David got it? Read all 150 Psalms. Read every psalm that David penned. And I challenge you to find one where David sang about killing Goliath. I'm going to tell you, if I had killed Goliath, I'd wrote a lot of songs about him. I'd wrote a book and given a television interview and tweeted about it and put a picture out of Goliath's head hanging up. And I'm telling you, the world would have known. But see, for David, it wasn't about Goliath. No, look up there. It was that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel. David got it. Hey, everybody else sang about Goliath. Remember? Saul hath killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. But you never find a record where David ever sang that song. Listen to me. All of David's songs were not about Goliath. All of David's songs were about God. Amen. Can I tell you why? Hey, this is why God called him the man after His own heart. Because David, with nothing in his hand but a shepherd's staff and a sling and a little harp, had learned that on ordinary days and difficult days and lonely days, there was a God in heaven who was preparing him for something. If he'd just be still and wait and rest and trust, God Himself would bring it to pass. Being confident of this very thing, that He who began a good work in you. How many of you know at some point in your life God started a good work in you? Would you raise your hand? He who began a good work in you will perform it to the day of Jesus Christ. He is the author. He is the finisher of our faith. Look at me, please, church. You can trust Him. By the way, everything that David is remembered for, God prepared him for in 1 Samuel 16. David is remembered as the giant killer. That'd be nice. He learned it with a sling in his hand in 1 Samuel 16. David is remembered as the greatest king that the chosen nation of God ever knew. He was prepared for it with a shepherd's staff in 1 Samuel 16. And David is remembered as the sweet psalmist of Israel. And he was prepared for it with a little harp in a Judean wilderness in 1 Samuel 16. There is one other thing David is famous for. I'm going to say something. When I do, I want you to say the next thing that comes to your mind. David and, I heard two things. Goliath and Bathsheba. Men are remembered for their greatest successes and their greatest failures. And the one thing that David is remembered for that is not good was because he was not doing what God had prepared him to do. He had taken matters into his own hands. He was the king. He was in charge. He'd prepare it. It's dangerous, David. Can I tell you that when I want to control and I want to guide and I want to make it happen and I want my way, like a little child fussing with my father, I always make a mess of it. But when I sit down and close my mouth long enough to say, Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm going to trust you, suddenly things start happening. And God starts working. And little staffs and little slings and little harps, suddenly extraordinary things start coming out of these very ordinary things. Look, because they are in God's hand now. And I don't know who I'm preaching to tonight, and I don't know what your circumstances, but I came to tell you, God is doing a preparing work in your life. And you're real anxious to get to 1 Samuel 17 and have the victory. But listen to me, don't despise God's preparing work. Don't get anxious living in 1 Samuel 16. Look, you just wait on God. Believe that the Lord is with you at this moment. Rest in Him, and He will bring it to pass.